Welcome back to another episode in our series of What I Wish I Knew About Money as a Teenager. My name is Christian Polanco. I'm a partner and financial advisor here at FSI.
And my name is Jade Bergerson, and I'm one of the portfolio managers here at FSI.
All right, and so we're back today to kind of shift away from, we've talked a lot about budgeting, savings, building credit, and we're going to talk about the next important thing that we just felt was a really important topic to get into the details on, and that's investing. And not only investing and what's important about it, why it's important to invest, but we're also going to talk about inflation and why inflation matters, what it is, and the relationship between investing and inflation. So if, whether you already are investing, maybe you already have a investment account open like a Roth, or maybe you have a part-time job that allows you to contribute to something like a 401k, or if you absolutely know nothing about investing and you're wondering how to even get started, you are in the right place. To get things started, I am curious, to Jade, when you hear the word inflation, what comes to mind?
Well, if you ask me when I was a teenager, nothing would come to mind. But now, like you mentioned, I just think of it like a silent killer and the reason for wanting to be invested in stocks. I think about erosion of purchasing power, and what that basically means is that over time, your dollar is slowly worth less and less. It's just a natural occurrence. In the US, it's been on average around 2% a year. And what that basically means is if you have $100 today, or if you have $100 a basket of goods today, because of 2% inflation, next year, the same basket of goods is going to cost you on average about $102. That doesn't seem like a lot of money whenever you're looking 1 year to the next. But it's that same idea of compounding with investing. Also happens with inflation. So there's a really good example from Dimensional, and it compares what you could have gotten, how much you could have gotten as far as milk goes for 9 cents in 1916 versus 1966 and all the way up to 2017. And 9 cents, believe it or not, of milk in 1916 would have gotten you a quart of milk.
That's crazy to think about.
Yeah. Fast forward to 1966, that same 9 cents would have gotten you one small glass of milk. And all the way to 2017, that same 9 cents would have gotten you 7 tablespoons of milk. Be even less today, but that's really what inflation is, and that's why it's so important, is that your money is slowly going to buy you less and less. As you go forward into the future. And so you want to protect your money as much as you can, and you want to also grow your money as much as you can and fight that silent killer, which is inflation. Inflation is important because it affects how much your money can buy. So it's one thing to have a lot of money and to have enough to buy the things that you need or to do the things that you enjoy doing, right? But over time, those things get more expensive. And as they get more expensive, that same amount of money is going to buy you less of that thing, that experience, the new pair of shoes, the trip to Italy, for example. So how do we fight against inflation? What is the best place to get, the best way to get started? One of the least scary options that people typically turn towards whenever they're not familiar with personal finance is just keeping it stowed away in a savings account. Or checking account. But the reality is most savings accounts and checking accounts out there are getting you no interest or little interest. Or even if you have a high yield savings account, which we talked about before, you're getting right now maybe 3.5%. But over the long run, stocks have actually done a really great job at protecting your money against inflation and actually growing your money through time. So if we look at stocks, their post-inflation returns, so this is incorporating that, on average 2% of inflation.
Gotcha.
From 1995 to 2024, stocks generated an 8.2% return. So that's over and above inflation. Meaning that not only are you keeping your purchasing power, but you're actually growing it through time rather than just keeping it at, say, a small local bank that may be giving you 0.01% interest while your money is losing 2% per year.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And I mean, because a savings account is important to a certain degree. Like you want to have some money for the things that are coming up. But as we start to get further and further out, inflation really starts to take a toll on, again, how much your money can actually buy. And if you're telling me that if I invest in stocks, I am going to outpace inflation by 2 to 3 times the rate, I am going to listen to every instruction that you give me to be able to do that successfully. What's the most important thing that we should be keeping in mind when it comes to investing? Especially, I'm just thinking back to when I was a teenager. I had a monthly allowance, and then I got my first job, but it really wasn't a whole lot of money. And they say that investing is delayed gratification. So for me, it was very easy to just spend all the money that I got as a teenager. I kind of struggled with setting it aside for the future. So what do you think is important, or what sort of habits would you recommend to your younger self?
Yeah, so I definitely want to address your question as far as the habits for investing and to really protect your money against inflation. But real quickly, too, I want to touch on, that 8.2% return from 1995 to 2024. That doesn't mean that we can expect it going forward. But it does mean that history has shown that people who have been invested in companies over the long run have done well. So that can always, change in the future, but you get rewarded for the risk that you take on. Mm-hmm. And that's why you get a larger return, is because you are accepting that risk that your money is going to fluctuate. Yep. Which is scary to some people. But the reality is, what's scarier? Is it accepting that volatility, the change in your portfolio value and your account value, or is it knowing that for sure you are going to lose your purchasing power if you don't invest? I would argue that keeping your money fully in cash is actually the scarier route. So then to your point, as far as getting started with investing, I think one of the most important things for everyone, but especially when you're starting out really young, is just consistency. The reason why is because when you're just beginning your first job, or you have a very, very small amount to invest per month, it's going to feel like you're making no headway whatsoever. Maybe you're starting out with $100 a month, and when you look back a year from now, it's not really going to have grown that much, Mm-hmm. But the consistency ensures that, one, you're building that habit to pay yourself first, rather than paying your bills and just trying to save whatever's left. And then it's also just ensuring that you allow that snowball to really start growing. And one day you're just going to look back, if you were consistent, and be really, really grateful for the fact that you started out the habit of investing young.
When you are thinking about investing, you can't focus so much on what is your money going to do once you invest it into a company. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But what that company ultimately does, how well your money does when it's invested in the stock market, is out of your control. So we want to focus on the things we can control, which is being consistent, right? Making those monthly contributions, being disciplined, setting up automatic transfer. Because what we do know is, while we don't know exactly what the markets will do, we do know that the longer you stay invested, the more likelihood that you're going to outpace inflation, that you're going to see positive returns. So it's just about accepting that the unknown is the unknown and controlling the things that you can control, which you can either, like you said, you can put it in a savings account and do nothing, and pretty much guaranteed to not be able to buy the same things today, 50 years from now, 10 years from now, or you can invest in, great companies and benefit from their profits, right? And participate in that.
And another thing I want to touch on with consistency as well is that I feel like when you are consistent, investing a portion of every single paycheck, a set amount of every single paycheck, it takes a lot of the emotion out of investing. If you don't define your goals starting out, then it's really easy to be like, oh, I'm not going to invest this year because the stock market's down. Or just setting up those automatic contributions from your 401k or whatever your options may be. It's allowing you to not consistently worry about what the stock market is doing, but just making sure that you're averaging it over time.
If you're a teenager, if you're a young adult in your 20s or your 30s, you almost want the market to be down. Absolutely. Because it's like a sale. It's like, you're your favorite store and all your favorite clothes are on sale. That is what, that's how we see the market when it's down. It's an opportunity to buy stocks on discount. Because if you think about all the great companies in the entire world, they all go through rough times, but they always, they always figure out a way to survive and profit in the long run. So if I could buy Netflix 50 years ago today, I totally would. Let's say we start investing in the stock market. How often should I be checking to see how well, like, my portfolio or another portfolio is just, where your money's invested, the companies and the stocks that your money is invested in is your portfolio. How often should I be checking my portfolio to see how it's doing? Like, should I check every day? What if I check one day and it's down? Like, I don't know. How do I manage the stress or anxiety that might come with that?
To be honest, if you're checking every single day, I think that you're going to have a lot of anxiety about it. It's something that's more set it and forget it, but I don't want to put a time frame on how often you're supposed to look at your portfolio, because sometimes it is important to just pay attention to how you are invested. We're going to talk about getting into or making sure your portfolio is diversified. But when you are investing, you do want to have a strategy, and you want to ensure, if you have a certain amount in US stocks and a certain amount in international stocks, that you're not just never looking at your portfolio, because you want to remain close to what your goal is. So while you do want to ensure those remain aligned, you don't necessarily need to look every single day to see, oh, am I up 2% today? Am I down 2%? It's keeping a really long-term perspective with, while also keeping in mind that you want to stay close to your allocations, whatever those may be. So another thing that goes along with consistency, another habit that I would say that you want to build is patience. And the reason why being patient is so important in investing is kind of similar to that consistency of, maybe if you've been investing for a year, you're going to look and your account value is not going to be very high. But if you're patient, you see that over the long term, that compounding really starts to take effect. So we can just look at historically how even just $1 has done. Yeah. So looking all the way back from 1926, if you were to invest $1, even though, if you're a teenager now, you're not going to have that chance. But let's say you invested $1 in 1926. If it was invested in US small cap companies by the end of December of 2025, that dollar would have turned into $43,837. Wow. If you were invested in US large cap companies, it would have been a little bit less at $21,453. But that doesn't happen in a year, it doesn't happen in a month, and it doesn't happen tomorrow. It happens over years and years. Specifically, if you're a teenager or you're really young, it's going to happen over your entire lifetime until you're ready to retire. And that, again, is why it's important to keep a long-term perspective.
No, that makes sense. And I think it's one thing to see it and say, oh, if I would have invested $1 100 years ago, I'd have $20,000 today. But it's a different thing to go through it and to go through the ups and downs of, everything that's happening every single day, and watching your money go up and down and up and down. So patience, consistency, not worrying about what's happening in the short term, and just knowing that if I'm consistent, if I put money in the market, if I continue to invest in, as many companies as possible, I will participate in the rewards, and it's a lot better than sitting around and doing nothing or keeping your money under a mattress. We highly advise against doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I want to draw attention to as well when it comes to just being patient with the markets is just really looking over the time periods for which you are invested. Because the longer your time period is, the more likely it is that you're going to experience a positive return. Like I said earlier, you're accepting risk by purchasing companies. Mm-hmm. And that means that your portfolio is not going to be up every single year when you decide to start investing. Capital Group provided some numbers on this for the past 82 years ending December of 2024. And basically over that time period for the S&P 500, if you looked at a 1-year investment period, 61% of the time you would have been positive, and 30% of the time you would have been negative. Then over a 3-year period, it looks a little bit better. Instead of 61% of the time being positive, now 78% of the time you see positive returns, while 11% you see negative, or just over 11%. And then if you expand that period to 10 years, over the time that Capital Group looked into, 100% of those 10-year periods were positive for the S&P 500 index. So you may be negative next year, you may not. But if you stay patient, if you stay consistent, then over a long time period, you're more than likely, history shows, going to end up way better than what you started with.
Basically, you're saying the longer I stay invested, the higher the chances that I'm going to see positive returns. I'm not going to know exactly what it is, but I know that if I trust the process and if I control the things I can control, I'm going to be sitting pretty good, in 10, 20 years, more than likely.
And I mean, I know that you, obviously as an advisor, you deal with a lot of clients, and I know you deal with a lot of anxiety because we talk about it here, how anxious clients can get when investing in the market. And what do you typically tell them whenever, we're in a year that's particularly volatile, just to maintain confidence in staying invested?
Especially whenever there's crazy headlines on the news about pandemics or wars, just things that it is out of our control, but at the same time, it is something that is very natural to feel some anxiety about when it comes to, well, how does this impact my money? How does it impact my investments? So a lot of the conversations I have with my clients first revolve off of, hey, it's okay to feel the way you're feeling if you feel anxiety or stress when the market is going down or when you feel like something is right around the corner. We're already taking this into account in your investment strategy. So I think it's not a surprise. The surprise is not knowing exactly when these events will happen, right? Because I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did. But we do know that they are going to happen. So we build a level of safety into that investment strategy. So you're going to have money invested in stocks for long periods of time. But what about the short periods of time? What if, you're saving money to buy a car in the next few years? You are going on a trip, in just a few months, right? That money we want to make sure is there for you when you need it. So typically we take that money and we sort of separate it out from stocks. We want to keep it more stable. Like if you think about money you keep in a savings account, sure, inflation is going to impact that money over long periods of time, but during short periods of time, it's more about just trying to keep that money as stable as possible. So we might keep some of that money in a savings account, or we may keep it in what are called bonds, which is basically like a savings account with the U.S. government. So those are the kind of things that I try to just reinforce to my clients is, I know all this crazy stuff is going on. You got to do your best to just turn off the TV or turn off the news or, think positive thoughts. But if we look at your plan, look at how much money we have in safety so that you can ride this storm out. And typically that gives people a sense of relief to just know that we are thinking about not just focusing on the long term, but the short term as well. I find there's some peace of mind there to know that you've got a little bit of money in safety to ride out the storms.
Yeah, and I think what's important to take away from that too, if you're just starting out, is that Your emergency fund, in this case, is going to be that short-term cash reserve for you. So that way you can stay invested in stocks without having to worry about, pulling money out of your investments because your car broke down or something. You have some sort of cushion there. And then also just making sure that once you do start investing and your emergency fund is sufficiently funded, that you're going into it with a plan to keep a certain amount safe for any short-term cash needs.
Yeah. And there's opportunity too when the market's down. Like we said earlier, right? The stocks are on sale.
Yep.
So if there's some money in there you don't need to use in the short term, now is the best time to buy.
And with all that, the last thing that I really want to touch on with just starting to learn about investing is really what type of investments that you maybe should look to hold. This is not going to be stock specific advice, but really I think it's just so important to keep in mind why diversification is important and what diversification even is.
So I didn't start investing until college, until I worked at a bank and I had a 401k. So that was my first opportunity to invest. Like I said, younger me, just money in, money out. But I had a little bit of education on investing at that point. So I knew, okay, I need to put it in like S&P 500, right? So I was like, all right, I'm going to put this in the S&P 500 and just not touch it. Not necessarily because I knew not touching it was a good idea, but because I didn't know what else to do outside of that. And what I didn't know was that actually part of the money I was putting into that account was automatically going into it was purchasing shares of the bank. So I was just owning shares of Wells Fargo stock along with the S&P 500. And I didn't realize that I was at the same time building up money in an account that was just invested in one company. And that was something where actually a coworker was like, hey, just so you know, that's happening. And you don't have to keep it in there. You can just move it into the pool that's invested in all the other companies as well. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that leads us right into our conversation about diversification, because there are some things to consider when deciding whether should I invest in just a few companies or how many companies should I invest in, right? What are your thoughts on that? Any similar memory growing up or with investing or?
Yeah, from experience, when I first started, I thought that stock picking was the way to go. My philosophy on that has since changed. I've lived and I've learned. But the problem with, maybe purchasing an individual stock is you got to know the right time to get in, and you got to know if there is the right time to get out when that is. You have to think about managing taxes if you're constantly trading in a taxable account, because when you realize gains, you're going to have to pay taxes on that, which can, interrupt this compounding of growth as well. Then you also have to just think about the fact that companies have done really, really well in the past. They've been the top performing companies in the US, and then all of a sudden they fall out of favor. Technology changes. The way we live our lives change. And a stock that was once the hottest stock in the US turns into something people forgot even existed. And you can think about that with today's top performing stocks too. In fact, it's actually really interesting to see. You talked about the S&P 500 earlier. And basically what that is the top the top stocks in the US, and it's a good tracker of the US stock market. So if you just want to stay diversified and you're basically saying, I believe in the long-term growth of this country, then I'm just going to buy into this, and I believe that overall the companies will continue to have positive returns moving forward, and I'll be rewarded for holding them. But if you look at the top 10 largest companies in the index, the trend has been back from 1927 all the way to 2025. Those top 10 stocks before joining that index, that's when, before everybody realized they were the hottest stocks to invest in, they had really great returns. The 10 years before, 12%, 5 years leading up to being added into the S&P 500, they had a 20% return. And just 3 years before, they have a 27% return. But then they get added to that index, and the 3 years after, they have just less than 1% return. Then the 5 years, they actually have a negative return, and they have a negative return in the 10 years after as well. What does this mean? It basically means that by the time a company is on our radar to invest in, or most people's radar to invest in, they've already experienced a large amount of their growth. Mm-hmm. So you have to find them before other people do. And then you have to know that at some point the returns will likely stagnate because new businesses come into the picture. And you have to know when is the right time to leave those companies. So it's just a lot more monitoring of your portfolio. It's a lot more research. And when you're just starting out, you don't necessarily know what to look for. You don't know the hazards to look for if you're buying an individual company, because not all of them do well. Some companies will go bankrupt. And so really what the idea of diversified investing is that it's putting your money in basically index funds or other types of funds that you can purchase that will hold a huge basket of securities. And with that, if one company goes bankrupt, you don't lose your entire investment.
That makes sense, because you basically have 10 at least thousands of companies in one fund, and it maybe, I don't know, even 50 or 100 companies don't do so well. Well, guess what? You got another 2,000, 3,000 other companies that are going to help to pick up the slack, or at least not feel as much of the negative returns when they do happen. I also wanted to add that, it's important diversification means owning everything. So it means you are going to benefit from the companies that are doing well today, but you're also going to invest in the companies that could be the next Amazon, the next Tesla, the next Google, before they become a household name. And so if you think about it, to have the return of the companies that are at the top today, you had to invest in them when people were probably saying, oh, no way this company is going to survive, or like, no way, Google is going to become, no one's going to use that search engine, right? Like, I remember using Ask Jeeves like back in the day when I was a teenager. No idea that Google was going to blow up the way it did. But my point is that unless you feel like you can beat or outsmart other people who dedicate their entire jobs to studying different companies, or have entire teams dedicated to try to find what the next big thing is going to be, you are better off owning everything instead of trying to guess. Own everything. You'll participate in the growth from everything. And most importantly, at the end of the day, you'll feel less stress. You'll be able to focus on the other areas of your life instead of, always having to pay attention to the little tiny things that the market is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I really wish that something that I would have known right out the gate is that you don't know what you don't know.
Yep.
And when you get started like the way I did, you kind of just learn by a mistake, which is one way to do it. Or you can, protect yourself from that outset and just make sure that you're not taking on too much risk in any one area of the market. And in this case, I've talked a lot about individual companies and being overly invested in one company. But with diversification, there's also that idea of being overly invested in one portion of the world. Mm-hmm. One thing that people tend to do is when they live in a country, they tend to tilt their investments toward that country because they're the most aware of what goes on there. They're the most aware of the businesses that are available there. And we just tend to have this like home bias. Really what's important to keep in mind there is that we've seen in the past this has not worked out well for people. And an example of that is with the Japanese market. If you look at the Japanese stock market, in 1989, it reached its all-time highs. and it came crashing down. And during that time period, it was the place that every investor in the world wanted to have their money in because of the prior returns, looking back. But those 1989 top returns were not once again seen until 2024. And basically what that means is somebody who invested at the top of the market at that point would have not gotten their money back until 2024.
Gosh.
Which is insane to think about,
yeah.
to sit for, 35 years with no investment return except, a negative investment return. That's not to say
really
that that's going to happen in the U.S.
Testing the patience.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. And when you see negative returns for that long, how do you not want to sell out,
Right.
So it's not just being diversified at the company level. It's also at the world level and making sure that you're properly allocated to international companies as well.
Yeah.
That way, if the U.S. continues to outperform, that's amazing that you're there to capture returns. And if it doesn't, and international markets begin to outperform, then you're equally weighted in your investments that you can capture those as well. The one thing I really just want to add here too is that when you're starting to think about investing, you really should think about it like the story of the tortoise and the hare. Is that the tortoise ultimately wins, and it's just by that patience and that consistency that you end up doing well over time. So.
I like that. No, it really is though, because you're going to be tempted to invest in something that looks like this big shiny thing that looks like, oh, if I just invest in that, I'm going to have it made. If you think back to the GameStop craze where, there were some people that became millionaires overnight, and then everyone just kind of jumped on the hype of that. And it was, I don't know, for those that spend time on Reddit, it's pretty sad to see a lot of the stories of people just putting their entire life savings into GameStop and immediately losing it in a very short period of time. So I think that's why it's important to understand, why investing is important, so that you can have a plan in place before you get started, and it'll be a lot easier to sort of like stay in your lane in a sense, so you're not reacting to things all the time. Unfortunately, emotions and investing don't mix together very well. And we find out the more often you make decisions out of a reaction because you feel stressed or anxious, or maybe you feel like greedy or unstoppable, like, oh, the stock is going to go, to the moon. More often than not, it's going to get you into trouble over the long term. I wanted to take a moment to kind of reflect on just everything we've talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And curious, Jade, what do you think, if you were speaking to your teenage self today, what would you want them to kind of walk away with today from our podcast?
From this episode, I would want myself, or hopefully you, to walk away knowing that investing is simple, but it's not easy. Even knowing what we talked about today, emotions are going to get in the way. And it's just about being consistent and patient, not only with your investing, but being patient with yourself. Being consistent in reminding yourself of the messaging of investing and the basic principles. Because inevitably you're going to want to make a stupid decision. And if you just keep reminding yourself about what data shows us about investing, then everything's going to be okay. It doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to invest in individual stocks. You just need to stay diversified. You just need to have a plan, and you need to stick to that plan.
To build off of that, for me, for my younger self, I wish I understood the importance of why it was important to have a plan, or why not just, why is investing important? Why is investing important, but why save it all? Like, why is having a plan around the way I invest important? So to my younger self, or to you, I would say, what do you want to save for? What's important to you? Like, why is money important to you to begin with? When 20, 30 years from now, what do you want your life to look like? And do you have a plan to get there? Something I wish I could tell my younger self, or tell you, is to have a plan in place before you start investing and understand not just why it's important to invest, but what do you want to save for? Is it, a lot of people think about retirement and this and that, but also think about the things that are in the short term. Where do you see yourself 5-10 years from now? What do you picture your life looking like? And do you have a plan to get there? If you need money to reach that goal, do you have a plan to make sure that the money is going to be there when you need it? And to just don't worry too much about the future when it comes to investing, because a lot of the future is out of your control. What is in your control is being consistent, being patient. And we know that the longer you stay invested, the odds are going to be in your favor of seeing positive returns, being able to outpace inflation, meaning, you can still buy the things you buy today, 10, 20 years from now, at the same amount, if not more, right? And you're not going to be in a situation where you go to the grocery store and now all of a sudden the usual $200 you spend is $400 and you don't have quite enough to get you there. So, I wish I just spoke to my younger self a little bit more. Maybe had him listen to this podcast, but that is why we are talking to you today, so that you can avoid some of the mistakes or some of the potholes that we experience in our lives. And so we hope that you take away at least one or two things from our podcast today.
So thank you so much for listening in, and I guess we'll catch you next time.
We'll catch you next time. Thank you.